Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Massimo Zortea, teacher at the Master of Science degree in Engineering for Land and Environment. And welcome back to the fifth appointment in ESIC, second edition. This evening we have the pleasure to host two experts in a very interesting topic, the environmental conflicts. Very linked with the other topics treated up to now, such as sustainability in agriculture, the data scarcity and water resources management. Last week, you will be remembering, probably. And I'm projecting the poster of this event, this tonight's event. But let me present briefly the two panelists. In reality, three panelists were supposed to attend to the meeting, but Mr. Joseph Karancha in the Kenyan city of Nairobi has not been authorized by his company. So we will have another opportunity to hear from him the very interesting example of the water resources management in Nairobi city, 5 million people inhabitants. Let's begin from Alejandro Dussaillant. It's an engineering hydrologist specializing in hydrology, but with over 20 years of experience in hydrological processes, data analysis, modeling, and what are a kind of fluvial hydromorphology, green infrastructure, and catchment science, the typical environment of an environmental engineer. So a great expert in practical aspects. He will delight us with the experience in Latin American, but not only. And the second panelist will be the architect Thomas Festi, an Italian architect with a very long time experience in sub-Saharan area, especially in Kenya. He will speak about his experience in rural conflicts and environment-related conflicts in Kenya. So, Alejandro, you have the floor.
Grazie, Massimo. Thank you all for inviting me and for being here.
Unfortunately, we don't hear.
Oh.
Do you hear me? Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Just a moment. I know what.
I can hear.
I can hear. Yeah.
I can hear.
Okay, good. Should I share now then? In case the connection fails, you have a video of my presentation, but I'll try to share my screen. Can you see the full screen now?
It's okay.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about some conflicts that for some reason or another I've been either a witness or an expert witness or a researcher who was involved in some aspect of a couple of topics that relate to how we sustainably deal with water resources in Chilean Patagonia from my perspective as a hydrologist. So let me see if this changes. Okay, so just a little bit of context. Apologies, this is a Chile map upside down, north-south inverted, so as to give you an idea. The kind of climate we have in Patagonia, in case you don't know, is very similar to what you have in Northern Europe, and Northern Chile, very similar to the Sahara. So Patagonia is very wild, remote, extreme and very unique, has very pristine ecosystems, endemic biodiversity, and huge physical gradients, including topography, rain, but we have very little data. And it's quite critical because this is the only continental mass at this latitude. And apologies, this is in Spanish, but just to mention that Chilean Patagonia has the majority of the water resources of the whole country, including precipitation, lakes, rivers, and river flow. But it's under increasing threats, both direct and indirect. Of course, global warming affects our glaciers and ice fields in Patagonia, and this is a graph that is still valid in the sense of the mass balance of Patagonian ice fields is quite more negative in dynamics as opposed to other areas of the world. And of course, that meltwater means accelerated flow and sediment fluxes in Patagonian catchments, and also events like an increased frequency of glacial lake outburst floods, which I'll talk about in a minute. And on the other hand, a more local development pressures, including hydropower, which is something I will going to talk about in a few minutes, which involves more alteration to rather unknown river flow and sediment regimes, which I will talk about also in a minute. And of course, that entails a threat of biodiversity loss of these endemic species in fluvial wetland and fjord ecosystems. So some examples of impacts on the water cycle in Patagonia. As I mentioned, climate warming affects glaciers and ice fields, or reduces stored water, and also land use change pressures, including, and as I will mention briefly, increased land grabbing and groundwater pumping, the impact on the aquifers and recharge areas and associated rivers. Also, we've had in the last 5 to 10 years more extreme events, both from droughts, like in 2016 with the lower flows recorded in 50 years, and also quite recently, this last couple of years, and floods, not only because of glacial lake outbursts, but also more extreme precipitation events. And I have to mention just a little bit of basics of fluvial systems so as to continue the presentation. But a catchment, exemplified here in this drawing, produces water in organic sediments, solutes, including nutrients, large woody debris, tree trunks and branches, and particular organic matter, which are exported downstream in the catchment. And we have, therefore, regimes for all these different elements, which are very important because these regimes of flow, of sediment, temperature, solutes, large woody debris, determine the morphology and thus the habitat of species in the fluvial system. And that is, they condition the species present and able to survive and thrive. So speaking just of one regime, which is the flow regime, and taking this image from the classic POF paper of 1997, et al., we have a natural flow regime that affects what kind of, in the case of this figure, plant communities we can have at different levels of the channel, depending on the frequency, of course, of the floods occurring, and therefore impacting higher levels of the channel. And one thing that is very important to recognize is that the natural flow regime is not only whether the flows are high or low, but their duration, how quick are they to change, the timing in the season, in the month, in the day, in the case of hydro peaking, and the frequency. And all the regime matters. And just to extend a little bit of the example, you have the higher flows that are very important, for example, for the vegetation, which is further inland in the floodplain, the low flows, which maintain a basic aquatic ecosystem during the dry season. And as Boone and Arthington in 2002 showed in this paper and figure, the different aspects of the flow hydrograph, which is the flow in time, can have very important effects on the species and community and fluid ecosystem, not including only the flows that affect the channel form and produce habitat for different species, but also life history patterns and things like spawning and recruitment of fish and other aquatic biota. So hydropower, which is what I'm going to talk about now in Patagonia, has different environmental impacts on rivers. And still, this model of PETS 1994 is still valid. If you have a hydropower scheme, even a run of the river, which has a small dam, that creates a barrier effect that affects the flow regime, the sediment regime, because you have an impoundment, you change the flow going downstream, you capture sediment, you alter water quality because the water is being detained, the temperature changes, the concentration of different nutrient changes that affects the plankton, and also in a second order, the macrophytes, the periphyton, the plants that live in the fluvial ecosystem affects the channel form, as I mentioned before, and therefore the habitat, and that affects invertebrates and therefore also fish. So the key thing here to remember is that these impacts or these schemes can impact river natural regimes and the fluvial ecosystem functions. So what happened in Patagonia in the turn of this century, was that there was a big mega dam project, Proyecto Hidroeléctrico Aysén, PHA for short, from Endesa, at that point Endesa España, with a Chilean company called Boone, $3 billion US project with 2 mega dams in the Baker River, 3 in the Pascua River, plus 1 smaller initial one to power all the construction, which would have flooded rivers, wetlands, and with their hydro peaking that would have affected these fluvial ecosystems in a big way, and a more than 2,000 kilometer transmission line, because this energy was not for Patagonia, was for central and particularly northern Chile and the mining industry, with that line going through private and public land, indigenous territories, national parks, you name it. So of course this created a lot of controversy and opposition, but the Aysén population and also the Chilean population was split in half, because half of the people wanted the jobs and the money, and maybe the other half were really worried about the environment and also the social impacts of these huge construction sites in a very remote area with small and very tightly knit communities. So a little bit of explanation of the context. The Baker River is the largest river in Chile by flow, over 1,000 cumex mean annual flow, and it's the outlet of the Carrera Lake, which is the second largest in South America after the Titicaca. The Hydro Aysén project in the Baker would have included Baker 1 here upstream and Baker 2 here downstream, flooding huge areas with an environmental impact study that lacked proper baseline data and consideration of geohazards, as I will mention in a minute. And in a context of a country with a very special water code, as I will mention, the dam siting and design wholly inappropriate, and a lot of politics and centralized decision-making. This is just a diagram of the project of Baker 2 Dam, showing actually what the dam would have been and the huge area that would have been flooded. So as I mentioned, we have a very special water code. Hopefully with this new government, we will start changing, and the new constitution will start changing this context of a private way of dealing with the water resource, The water code allows for private ownership for forever. Also, the electricity law is very much more powerful than the environmental law. The dam licenses don't expire. Remember, countries like the US is 30 years, and then you have to reapply. The reference terms for studies are not independent. They are created by the company and the consultants that work for the company. There's no cumulative studies. So that means, for example, in the case of Baker 1 and Baker 2, they would have been assessed separately instead of the cumulative impact on the Baker River. There's no study of alternatives, no matter if the site is a bad one. And there's no independent evaluation. And in general, the regulatory framework is trampled by bad policy and bad politics. One thing that I got involved as part of a group of colleagues from Universidad de Concepción and from the Centro de Investigación en Ecosistema de la Patagonia in 2008 onwards, and 2010 when the actual environmental impact study from PHA came out, we were doing some collaborative work on looking at outburst floods and sediment transport in the Baker Basin. And actually, I had the opportunity to share with a couple of Trento academics, including Guido, who's here, and also Walter and others in those years heading up to 2010, where we participated in the evaluation of that environmental impact study by PHA, which didn't consider very well that there was a change in hydrologic regime because of a new cycle of glacial lake outburst floods occur from April 2008, coming from the Lago Cachet II, who drained under the Colonia Glacier into the proglacial Lake Colonia, into the Colonia River, and into the Baker River, such that the normal situation where you have the Baker main stem, remember the largest river in Chile, would be a small tributary compared to the high flows coming from the glacial lake outburst flood, with impacts upstream because of backwater effects, flooding of farmland, drowning of cattle, destruction of infrastructure, which is critical for all these settlers, which have a very tough life at this very frontier land. Of course, there was also other evidence that the company chose to tone down, including paleo hydrological evidence that there had been even larger floods in the past, which was very critical because the spillway and design flow of the dam was done without considering these higher risky flows, and also the reservoir sedimentation didn't consider this huge amount of sediment that would have filled up the reservoir much faster than the company said. So I'm not going to go into details here, but we did studies in collaboration, and there's Guido there, maybe not with a tuta like now, but very similarly dressed for a river trip. We did some studies with people also from the UK. That's Andy Russell from the University of Newcastle, and Tony Brown from Southampton, people from other collaborating institutions from Europe and the USA. And we show also with evidence that there had been very large flows, much higher than the spillway design of around 9,000 to 10,000 cubics. But of course, it wasn't only it wasn't the scientific studies that brought ESIC PHA down. It was really the people, and more than the people even was the fact that when Enel, the Italian company, bought Endesa, they were already changing their portfolio and their image towards green energy, and PHA was not something that they were very proud of, and basically the political will plus the economical decision making shelved probably forever PHA a few years ago. Just to mention that the generic problem hasn't gone away, although at a different scale. This is a very much more recent, couple of years ago, and current, a small run-of-the-river project in Puerto Guadal, by the shores of Lago General Carrera, where again the company, in this case the Lysen, didn't do baseline studies, or are quite lacking, and didn't even go through the environmental impact assessment process, with very disputable assertions on ecological flows and scenic flows, and without any information whether they would be producing hydropeaking and therefore impacting this scenic and ecologically significant and touristically significant resource for the local community. We had, I'm not going to go into details here, but I had the opportunity to visit the site, do some measurements, talk to the community, and also eventually, as part of a bigger group, present to the Chilean Senate what were the problems with this project, and eventually the report and the lawyers' work really meant that only by the end of last year, the environmental court in Valdivia said that the company needed to go through the environmental impact assessment process. Unfortunately, the company hasn't complied and still goes on with the construction. So this is probably going into to escalate currently. I'm not going to go through the details of this, but a colleague of mine, Claudio Mayer, also involved in these studies, more than 10 years ago already stated in a report what were the principles for a more sustainable hydropower development in Chile, including strategic assessments of catchments, considering technical, economical, social, and environmental aspects, something that Nepal did in the 1990s, and other aspects that would provide a more sustainable framework for hydropower generation and to be greener, really, in the context of Chile. But hydropower development is not the only impact on Patagonian rivers and source of conflicts. We are working on a project on gravel mining in the Rio Simpson, which is a world-famous fly fishing river. There was a world championship a few years ago of fly fishing, also well known for rafting and recreation. Unfortunately, used in a bad way for gravel, for very important aspects of road building in Patagonia, but in a very unsustainable way, creating an impact which is visually very clear here: turbidity, fine sediments that, of course, affect the water quality and the biota downstream, but also at the catchment level, deforestation and impacts on the water cycle of abstractions and land grabbing. We have another project working on exactly this, where how to better manage water abstractions for drinking water, for rural drinking water, and another one on gravel mining, which I show here, so as to provide better monitoring tools, citizen science, and knowledge-based evidence, so that we can decide on a better way of dealing with gravel mining in this river and maybe other rivers in Chile, including deciding whether at what time, temporal and spatial scales, gravel mining can be done in a safer way, and also eventually migrating to other sources of gravel for road building and other aspects. But the most emerging and grave threat, in my view, is not water abstraction, it's not gravel mining, it's not hydropower dams, it's really the land grabbing and urbanization of Patagonia, partly driven by the pandemic, partly driven by this beautiful, beautiful landscape. People want to live there, and I can understand that. But unfortunately, that means that if they live there, the native species will not be able to live there because of the impacts of all these urbanization in areas, including active floodplains in natural protected areas. And that's why the current governor of the Aysén region, with NGOs and environmental lawyers, are pressing the environment officers to halt this kind of projects. I think I'm probably in my time, but I'll be happy to entertain any questions if there's time for that. Grazie mille per la vostra attenzione. Muchas gracias. Aquí termina la presentación.
De nada, Alejandro. Thank you very much. As usual, the professor in universities is very clear and trained in explaining difficult concepts in a very, very simple manner. In your vision, the presentation was focused on the exploitation of natural resources, but especially water resources. And many times environmental conflicts hidden a conflict of interests, not a conflict of visions or values or principles, but very, very basic interests, as you explained very well. And now is the turn of another experience in a different continent, in a different context, but focusing also in exploitation problems, in fighting for the right of exploitation of natural resources. So I'm passing now the microphone to Thomas Festi. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Massimo.
Question time after the two interventions, of course.
Can you see?
Okay. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Massimo. I want the short presentation to avoid the misunderstanding or create a false expectation. Mine is not a technical profile. I try to make sure that the projects are successful, but I don't go into the technical matters. Because,
excuse me, Thomas, we don't hear very well. And unfortunately, you should be capable to speak slowly. More
now
loudly.
you can.
Okay.
Massimo is better now?
Yeah, good.
Okay, sorry. So I said I want to start with a short presentation of me to avoid the misunderstanding or expectation. Mine is not a technical profile. I try to make sure that the projects are successful, but I don't go into the technical matters because I degree in management engineering, and so I manage a project. The project presented is carried out by a very small association, a voluntary association based in Trentino. The association carried out a project in Romania, Peru, Kenya, Uganda, and Italy, mainly to support needy children. And the project that I started to talk about the environmental conflict is Kangaperol Moran. Is a program set up in 2009. We work with the malnourished and the disabled children in the field of education, healthcare, and awareness and involvement of the local community. And the local partner is the Sister Servant of the Visitation, a religious congregation, Italian religious congregation. And the intervention in action carried out over the years have been many and all aimed at responding to the needs that emerged over the years and tried to make the project economically sustainable. As I said, the project started in 2009 to respond to a food and health emergency linked to the effects of drought and that periodically occur in the context in which it operates. Olmoran is located in the Rift Valley province, Laikipia West district, at 83 kilometers far from Nauru, one of the major centers of the region, 2 hours by car from Olmoran, and 250 kilometers far from Nairobi, the Kenya capital city. And with you take 6 hours by car to travel from Nairobi to Olmoran. The characteristics of the area is a semi-arid zone, and so we have a rainy and dry season. Is at 1,940 meters, okay, and the economy is based on the agriculture and livestock. There are the presence of different tribes: Pokot, Turkana, Kikuyu, Kalenjin, Samburu, and Borang. And in all the Kenya, there are more than 40 tribes. And just to give you a preview of the area, the electricity is present only from 2012. The issues that we find in this area over the years and almost regular basis, we have had to deal with security problems related to the tribal clashes. Initially, we didn't understand why. With time and the deepening of knowledge of the context, we understood that these clashes are connected with the and the water resources present in this area. These tribal clashes are escalating more and more due to the climate changes. The most striking example, as can also be seen from the image on this slide, is represented by the presence, 10 minutes by car from the village of Olmoran, of a private range and estate, which is mainly concerned with the protection of the fauna and the local flora. Here, the rains are more frequent and the lack of water is not so worrying. And so we start to ask us why, how this is possible. And the tribes are increasingly aggressive and threaten the safety of the range owners by illegally entering to graze animals and dispose of water supplies. And to continue investigate how is the situation in the area, we understand that 30 years ago, the territory of Olmoran was also populated by forest and rich in hydrological resources, and the rainy season was regular. And so we understand that the indiscriminate exploitation of these resources has transformed the territory and made the living condition of the settled and the semi-nomadic tribes unstable. So we understand that the climate change is the main of these environmental and social conflicts. So the final open question that we want to leave to the people to the audience is, what is the right balance between environmental protection and the survival of the local population to avoid environmental conflict? This is the main question that we try to resolve and we try to answer through the realization of our project. But we already have no answer.
Okay, Thomas, is that all for you?
Yeah.
Okay, open question for all the audience, but open question also for the UNESCO chair for engineering for human and sustainable development. Since the very beginning of this UNESCO chair, in our experience, we're focusing on this question, more or less. In the sense that managing resources, studying the exploitation of resources, natural resources, maintain a balance is one of the more important questions for a professional, especially in scientific matters, such as engineering and environmental engineering. But as you have learned by the two panelists, and probably from many other panelists, the environmental conflicts are not involving only scientific issues or scientific problems, but also juridical problems, political problems, economical problems. So the question is very delicate and no direct answer, no simple answer is possible. The experience in some Saharan area, for instance, also for our students, that we have sent in several field missions in the project stage course at the end of the Master of Science degree path is very complicated. You can think of the situation in Tanzania, in Uganda, in South Sudan, even in Ethiopia, where the natural resources are exploited in a very unbalanced way. And for instance, the MDB experience for our students were very shocking in understanding that the projects financed by development cooperation agencies many times are worsening the situation instead of improving the situation. But I would like to open the debate now. As usual, you feel free to come here at the desk and put the questions or your remarks, proposal, especially in understanding the role of the engineer and the environmental engineer, especially in helping on how to solve the conflict. For instance, according to my experience, I'm an environmental lawyer, so I'm teaching to engineers, but not only to engineers. According to my experience, the main problem is the problem of the truth. In other words, to be precise in presenting the terms of the conflict. When you are describing the components, for instance, the hydropower energy company as the bad side, let's say, the dark side of the moon, and we are the best of the world. It's a typical approach in black and white position, but conflicts are not settable in a black and white position only. And as Alejandro said, so let's open the debate. I'm confident you will be interested in getting in depth with the possible role of you in being a protagonist in solving the conflicts all around the world, even in Italy. We have a lot of environmental conflicts. I invite you to consult the websites mapping the conflicts. For instance, the 2 or 3 great maps websites in the world. One of them is located in Rome. So the Center for Environmental Conflicts is well documented, even though not so precise in presenting the single cases. But the Spanish one, for instance, Atlas of environmental conflicts is very, very precise in presenting all these different situations. So, any question, friends? Or need of clarification by Alejandro and or in Latin America or in whatever other kind of situation, because as you have understood, Alejandro, teaching in England, if I well understand, is open to very different contexts, very different regulation of the conflicts. For instance, Germany is in European Union and Chile not located in a specific environmental context according to the environmental law, but the typical approach in putting on the table different interests and combating among them is the same, quite similar in whatever parts of the world, even in Middle East, even in Asia, etc. And also from the virtual classroom, of course, you can intervene and put on the table your specific situation, experiences. I have seen also Walter, my friend, Walter, and other experts in the typical context of fluvial hydromorphology and the conflicts related to this context. So feel free to contribute with your personal experience, professional experience. Okay, I guess that you have understood more things that you are capable to explain in these few minutes missing. Nicola, what about this topic? Nicola is our technician in this context, but is a PhD candidate, so involved in the typical agricultural issues and also in the not sustainable agricultural conflicts. So I'm asking for an intervention by him. In the team organizing the ESIC webinar series, we are rounding all the roles. So we are making us available to be whatever kind of expert in technology, in moderating, etc. And tomorrow you will be here in place of us. So what about the first intervention, for instance, about the situation of a country such as Chile? Very long, 4,000 kilometers, very different, but also Italy is very long, 1,300 kilometers. No question, no conflict, I guess. We can put the gallery position just to make seeable everybody.
Internal conflicts.
Okay, friends. Anything? We are also recording, as usual, this session in order to put at your disposal. You will find the link to the photo gallery, the recording, video recording, and also the slides by all the previous panelists, and also by Alejandro and Thomas. No doubts? So you are self-confident in your capabilities. I would like to put the two questions without interfering with the audience, but I'm very curious to hear from you, Alejandro, and you, Thomas. What about the role not only by technicians, but also for politicians, in sense that, especially at the local level, the sense of lack of power in front of the great plans and technological plans of exploitation of water resources, soil resources, mineral resources, etc. It's very, very strong. But local administration and local governance is probably the best way in order to deal with the conflicts at the local level. So what about the role of the local administrator and public administration in general, and combining the private sector and the public sector in trying to address such conflicts in favor of the population? I mean, please, one word by you.
I don't know if Thomas wants to lead. Thomas, if not, I can respond. At least in Patagonia, I guess the answer is not easy, because you have local authorities who are sometimes quite connected to the demands of their communities. But I see at least 2 or 3 problems. One is, unfortunately, sometimes the local administration doesn't have the capability and expertise to be able to support or frame the problem. As you, Massimo, very well said before, sometimes you need a good framing of the problem to start with. I mean, usually. And it's very common in Patagonia Aysén. It's a quite remote area. Going anywhere is many hours in a very tough road, as Walter and Guido can tell you. These remote communities have local authorities, municipalities with very limited expertise, even overall staff numbers. So that is a problem, and actually we are thinking of ways of addressing it. The other problem is that usually, as I mentioned, the community is split in half. Half of the community wants the project because it brings jobs and money. In very low income communities, these projects can look like saviors, but unfortunately, as we know from experience, sometimes they look like it, but it's a mirage. And although you get jobs, there are short-term jobs, and then the environmental passives are longer term. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. in our case, politicians exploit the situation to foment tribal clashes, harm the tribes, to take control of the area, facilitate or obstruct the presence of one tribe rather than the other. And they never matter about the conflict related to the environment. So they are one of the cause of these clashes, because when there are tribal clashes, then the British sent the army to try to pacify the area. So and then the local politicians change, and then change the tribe that come in this area. So for a period there is the Samburu, for the other period there is the Turkana, and so on, and this is related to the tribe that the politics belong. So they not want to resolve the issues. They create the issues, and so the role of the politicians is something that make the situation worse than that could be.
Right, so understood. The second question I would like to put to all the audience in order to share it's the role of the education and the higher education, especially of local universities, in addressing the capacities and improving the involvement of the local resources, human resources, I mean. Because many times the role of the cooperation, international cooperation, is to substitute the capacities of local capacities by sending the capacities to address such conflicts, for instance. And so I would like to ask the two panelists, but also all the other participants, to reflect all together on how to improve our capacities as a University of Trento, but also as partner of local university. And we are cooperating now with Kenyan universities in addressing the conflicts related to the exploitation of natural resources. So please, a word by you, Thomas and Alejandro, and whatever other participants. In other words, is training Italian engineers enough or not? I don't think so, but it's my opinion.
Yeah, related to the Olmoran area, the human resource try to run away from this area, because there are not the right occasion to try to develop the area, because there is a lack of investment to try to resolve these issues, and also to try that the local population have the opportunity to live there with the resource that they can find in this area. So the young try to go away from this area, and so it's not easy. Okay, you can send an engineer here, but the condition is not enough to try to do something to make the situation better than now.
If I may, well, obviously I cannot comment really much on the Italian engineer, although the Italian engineers I know are very good. But me being Chilean, but also Italian and associated to Universidad ESEN, I can say in Patagonia, in Chile, I can say that as that university started just recently, it was a demand of a big protest in 2012 from the region, and finally in 2017 it started. And from the beginning, we have designed as best as we could degrees and programs and curriculums in a way that are geared towards the local challenges, the regional challenges that ESEN has. Having said that, it's only 5 years, and probably there's a lot we can improve. And maybe it's something to explore. It's a question for you guys in Trento, whether there's an opportunity there to connect Universidad ESEN and budding Chilean ESEN engineers with the Italian Trento ones, and have some kind of cooperation, even online, on sharing about challenges and opportunities. And the other thing that I mentioned before, maybe also an idea of something we could talk about later, but how to support local authorities and provide knowledge transfer opportunities so as to build local capacity in those very remote areas.
So the challenge is huge, but we are launching it also with the ESIC web series, because it's we try to provoke you in trying the complexity of all the situation, and the only scientific approach is not enough, but also the only economic approach is not enough. And the example of the exploitation of the hydropower, that is theoretically a renewable source of energy, but given the reduction of the availability of natural resources due to the climate change and many other factors, demonstrate that the sustainability, environmental sustainability, without a strong international cooperation is nothing, almost nothing. And human resources are important, like the economical resources. So, any other question or proposal, friends, and request of clarification, proposal for further topics in the third edition? And while I'm remembering you that we are waiting for the last appointment, 18th May, we are waiting for you here. Don't miss the last appointment, last event on the nature-based solution in urban context, right, yes, Nicola? And will be another very challenging experience by our colleagues involved in studying how to apply the natural approach in solving problems created by the human settlements. And for instance, the hydropower production, producing and transporting from 2,000 kilometers and 300, it's a typical human-induced needs of energy, because urban settlements are increasingly demanding the power, the electricity power, but the answer probably is not suitable, as Alejandro demonstrated with this intervention. So, friends, I guess we are a bit tired. As usual, we are studying, and now the evening is a bit waiting on our shoulder. So have a good rest now. I'm thinking with all my sincere gratitude, Thomas and Alejandro. See you at the next next occasions in the future. Hope to see you also in presence, probably in the context also of our new experience in engineering for environmental sustainability and international cooperation. Right, tomorrow will be start a new experience with a meeting, international meeting here with the colleagues of the Scientific Institute of Lisbona and the Universitat Politecnica of Valencia in a new Erasmus Mundus initiative. So ESIC, it's multiplying their efforts in order to offer to all students and to all teachers and practitioners and development cooperation organization to start new paths in order to improve the capacity to work all together. So thank you so much. Once again, see you next appointment in 2 weeks. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.